Into Thin Air, written by John Krakauer, is a first-person novel about Krakauer's ascent of Mount Everest. Krakauer is given the opportunity to climb Everest when he is asked to write an article about the commercialization of the mountain. Krakauer, an avid outdoorsman and climber, is excited by the opportunity to climb Everest while reporting. Krakauer arrives at the mountain, led by the well-known guide Rob Hall. Krakauer, along with the other members of the expedition, spend weeks acclimatizing to the high altitudes. Finally, the time had come to begin their summit push. The group left Camp 3 and headed for Camp 4, their last stop before the summit push. After spending the night at Camp 4, the expedition left camp early in the morning to begin their ascent to the summit. Krakauer, a good climber, is in the front of the group with the other strong climbers. Krakauer reaches the summit by 1:15 p.m., well before the predetermined turnaround time. John Krakauer takes some pebbles from the summit and begins his descent back to Camp 4. As 2 p.m. passes, the turnaround time, the guides allowed their clients to continue hiking on towards the summit. This decision is heavily debated throughout the novel. As the slower climbers and their guides reach the summit, a storm moves in. These climbers try to make their way back to Camp 4, but many have little to no energy left in the freezing cold. Rob Hall radios to camp that he and Doug Hansen, a client, were stuck in the storm and that Hansen had become unconscious. Some of the Sherpas and veteran guides safe at Base 4 decide to try to rescue the climbers stuck on the mountain. They are able to rescue some of the climbers, but unfortunately there were many climbers that were unable to be rescued. In all, 5 members of Rob Hall and Scott Fisher's expeditions were tragically killed in the storm. John Krakauer wrote this book when he returned home to try to explain what happened on those 2 infamous days in early May. Throughout the novel, Krakauer also hints at some of the reasons why he feels the disaster was worse than it should have been. One of the factors that contributed to such an awful disaster is the commercialization of Mount Everest and the inexperienced climbers that the commercialization attracted. One way Krakauer exposes the problems commercialization creates is through characterization. Krakauer portrays Sandy Pittman to be the reason that others in the expedition lost their lives. He blames the amount of work the Sherpas had to do for her while looking after other clients on Pittman's inexperience on high peaks. Krakauer effectively analyzes how the inexperience of many of the climbers led to this tragedy. The inexperienced climbers had to be carefully watched by the guides and Sherpas. Pittman was so inexperienced that a Sherpa had to carry her up the mountain at one point. These situations caused the guides and Sherpas to become fatigued and may have hindered their ability to safely guide their clients to the summit. Another way Krakauer exposes the dangers of commercialization is through questioning those responsible for the commercialization. Krakauer questions the guides, Hall and Fisher, as to why they allowed for so many inexperienced climbers to attempt such a dangerous climb. John Krakauer concluded that although the clients are the ones lacking experience, having guides that allowed inexperienced climbers contributed to the tragedy. Another effective choice Krakauer made was suggesting that regulations need to be enacted in order to avoid another tragedy. He suggests having a guide-to-client ratio of 1:1 and also evaluating the experience of each potential customer would allow for more successful summits with less casualties. Finally, Krakauer wrote this novel to explain the events that happened. He uses imagery and strong descriptions to make it seem as though the reader actually experienced the event. John Krakauer uses imagery throughout the entire book, giving the reader a complete understanding of what happened on Mount Everest. Into Thin Air gives a first-person recounting of what happened on May 10th through 11th, while exposing the fact that commercialization played a large part in the second most deadly year in Mount Everest history.